Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good following morning. And a special hello to Vicky Warner, who, of course, like clockwork, says hello during the AMA. Hi, Vicky. Today it is AMA number 89. Today is April 7th, 2022. Today we're going to talk to a good friend of the show and a good friend of ours, Rabbi David-Seth Kirshner, Temple Emmanuel in Gloucester, New Jersey. We have a lot to talk about with Rabbi Kirshner, but of course, I'm here with my beloved co-host, Rabbi Avi Baumel.
Shalom, shalom. It is the 6th day of Nisan. Wow, getting close to Pesach. Very exciting. And we are in Krakow. I'm actually in the next room, and I'm glad to be here with you.
Well, Avi, of course, the thing that is on everybody's mind, that's on our mind, that is occupying our minds and most of our time is the situation in Ukraine that continues unabated. The tragic situation of the war next to us and the refugees coming across the border in both directions at this point. But we are still very much in the middle of this crisis and 6 weeks in.
Yeah, as I guess we imagined, it would only intensify in terms of the support that's needed. The lines have gotten longer downstairs to people trying to get supplies and food. Really, I see them they need food, and there's long lines, and we're doing unbelievable work to get them the food. And what we saw at the border, we keep going back and. It's really hard to see every single time. You have to remind yourself, it's not something that happened in a week and then you say goodbye, but it keeps on going.
So let's get to that in a moment, because I think that we need also a little distance from these things. So while we're going to talk with Rabbi Kirshner primarily about the Ukraine crisis, and we will talk about the Ukraine crisis, I did want to bring up a recent incident that you had at the airport, which I thought unbelievable. So it is somewhat related because you were coming here to come to Krakow and then go to the border. And we'll talk a little bit about your recent trip to the border, but tell us what happened at the airport, Avi.
I've been doing this for 8 years, and usually in the last 5 years, I guess, the travel time to Krakow has been door to door, 5-6 hours, door to door. Last few days ago,
Midor,
it took me.
Would that be Midor Lador?
Nice.
Thank you.
A few days ago, it took me 24 hours to get to Krakow.
Rabbi Avi, did you ride your bicycle from Efrat to Krakow?
I cannot believe what happened. I was beside myself. I don't know how I still have a smile on my face. But listen, sometimes it happens, and I don't know. There are some people with, I guess, some chips on their shoulders, and you pick a wrong one and you end up in a big trouble.
Well, tell us what happened, Avi.
It starts with my mistake. I haven't done this in 8 years, but I did write the ticket as Avi Baumel instead of Abraham Baumel.
Which is what it says on your passport, Abraham Baumel.
Which is my passport, which every single Israeli would never entertain for a half a second, that there's two different people. Avi Baumel is Abraham Baumel. And I went to the airport. I got there early. I did all I needed to do, and then I got to the gate and I put my and they said go to the side, and the woman there checking said, wait a second, your name says Avi, and it's Abraham. I said, yeah, it's the same name. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. So then they brought the director of Lot.
No. When Avi says the director of Lot, for anybody watching, he doesn't mean the director of the giant multinational corporation Lot. He means the person who was in charge there at the gate. Continue. Not the director of Lot. The CEO of Lot was not the one they brought over.
The director of Lot from the Israel side. In other words, his job is, I guess, to be in charge of Lot flights, not even security. It's just a matter of, he's an Israeli guy, and he said, it's a problem. You can't go on with this ticket. I didn't want to argue with him. I said, you know what? I just want to get to Krakow. I'll buy a new ticket. He said, no, you can't buy a new ticket. I said, I'll change the ticket that I have. No, you're not allowed to change the ticket I have. I said, I'll leave the airport. No, you can't leave the airport because you're not in Poland and you're not in Israel and you're stuck right here and you can't leave and you can't. What's going on? I said, Avi and Abraham are the same person. He goes, I know. But as the head of the Lot in Poland, they wouldn't accept you. I said, all right, I'll worry about that in Poland. No, I'm not allowing it.
Shocking. Avi, I have to tell you that I find this unbelievable, especially coming from an Israeli who knows that Avi is Abraham.
I said, listen, I'm a rabbi. I'm going to help out with Ukraine and the Jewish community. I don't care. Did not care one iota. I said, listen, I could try to speak to the chief rabbi of Poland. He goes, sure. If the next 5 minutes, because we're closing the gate, he can call me and give me, have someone. Didn't work. And I had to wait an hour and then take a train back to Efrat and a bus and a car. And then early the next morning, I returned after just a few hours and did the whole process all over again.
So
under the name Abraham.
We're all in a situation where we don't like complaining about anything because obviously there's war going on and people that are really going through this. But I have to say that that's incredibly unfair. And I am planning on pursuing this with Lot and with whoever the powers that be, because I think that the world only gets better when people's bad behavior is, attention is drawn to it and is corrected. Maybe there'll be a real emergency and that person will make another decision like that and somebody will not get where they need to go. And it could be even worse than you flying the next day and just paying a few $100s more for that. So I think that we should pursue this. I think it's outrageous. It's outrageous, that thing.
Jonathan, I was thinking about this and let's say I had the power to get him fired. Would I? Is it the right thing to do? So you Jews generally say, you know what? Have a little rachmanus. And I imagine you'll say that then that's how the world stays stagnant and doesn't go forward and people don't learn lessons.
Well, I think that if people aren't held to account and we don't try to do these things, then unfortunately people behave badly. And I think the best thing that would happen for the world would be somebody else in that job. And the best thing that would happen to this guy would be for him to get fired. And then he can go home and think about his behavior. And I'm sure the next job he would do, he would be nicer to people in your position.
That's a pretty harsh approach. And I'm not sure. I would like a
biblical approach.
I would like Lot to reimburse me for the flights that I lost, and I'd like a letter of apology as to how he acted towards me. That's what I want from him. I haven't, dealt with it, nor have you. We've been a little busy with other things. Thank God I was able to come here the next day and straight back into the work that we're doing, which is much more important than a silly guy who had a little too much power. And we move on.
Fair enough, Avi. I appreciate that your handling of that. But of course we can't let that go. Just you start letting things go, it's anarchy. It's anarchy, Avi.
Today I was at a funeral. It was sad. It was a member of the Jewish community, a survivor. I think he was 96, 97. He was born in 25.
Wow.
He lost his family, but he jumped off the train on the transport on the way to Auschwitz or wherever it was. He was saved then by a righteous Pole, and he made it through the war and made his way to Israel. And then in Israel, he got to 56. In 56, they wanted him to fight in a war, and he apparently moved to Germany from Israel in 56. I guess that's when the reparations were going on. So it was probably, good for him. And then he got married, and then he got married again, and spent the last years in Poland. He had been to the Jewish Community Center, and he had been to the Jewish community in the shuls. Quiet guy, but it was sad. It was another piece of our history. He had no children. And so I went there and I, recited the El Mole Rachmim, and we buried him appropriately, although he he swore not to be buried in the Jewish cemetery. He had an altercation with some peoples that control the Jewish cemetery. So we had a Jewish funeral in a non-Jewish cemetery.
I would also not like to be buried in this Jewish cemetery in Krakow. Hopefully that won't happen for many years, but just putting it out there. Yeah, I want to, so we've been very busy. I think the last AMA was 2 weeks ago. So we're, just not doing it every week, keeping just very, 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 very busy. And we've really increased our efforts. What's going on? We've rented the warehouses, one of which is full. I saw one of them today. We have literally maybe 500, 600 people a day coming in and getting goods, and we're renting more space. We just signed the contract on a palace outside the city, which you can put 100, 150 people there. So we're really ramping up our efforts. Although there aren't as many people coming across the border, the need is great, and people have less money than they did weeks ago and a month ago, and are coming from places deeper inside Ukraine where there's more need. And the people that we first saw coming across were in better shape than these Ukrainians that we're seeing. And we're running, I think I counted 14, 15, 16 separate programs to help Ukraine. Less at the border, more inside Ukraine, and more inside Krakow.
Yeah, we saw something at the border 2 days ago, which I thought was remarkable, because I've been there 5 times, and this was the first time I saw more people going to Ukraine than coming from Ukraine. And they explained to me that when they're going to Ukraine, they're going to Lvov and the outskirts, and they're coming to Poland because there's no food. So it's easy for them to get food and to go back to Ukraine. They're kind of going back and forth. So I thought that was an interesting thing. Although in Przemysl, the place was packed, and there's the people who are here are in great need. Another interesting statistic that we saw was that from those people, Ukrainians who applied for an identity card in Poland, 700,000 identity cards were given in the last month. And of those, 97% were women and children, or something to that effect. And that's a remarkable number. And not including the people who haven't done it yet, and not including those who've gone in every which direction. But Poland just absorbed, and in an official way, 700,000 more Ukrainian refugees, and they're trying to deal with them as well as they can.
And that's a small percentage of those who are here. There are over 2 million, clearly, with the few that have gone back. The some that have gone back, there are way over 2 million Ukrainians here. It's amazing to walk in our building, and now it's quiet. It comes ups and downs. But yesterday I walked into our building, and there were 100 people waiting outside to come into the building, and we had trucks pulling up from Spain, like 4 trucks that pulled up from Spain and said that they, that had heard about from another organization what we're doing, and brought food and supplies and all. Amazing. It's amazing, really.
Yeah.
I have to say that that we fully transformed into a humanitarian aid organization. I think we're hiring even more people now. We have to have somebody to manage the warehouse. I went to the warehouse today. It's just that is a huge operation. So I think we're looking at it soon. I think we'll be almost at 20 new employees just dealing with this crisis. We're past 15 right now.
Yeah, just anecdotally, like a few weeks ago, I guess 3 or 4 weeks ago, when we set this place up, I watched the women and children come in, and they came in, and the children went straight to the toys, and the women went straight to clothes. And yesterday and today, I went downstairs, and they all go straight to food. It's frightening. They just stand right around, and the person who's opening the boxes can't get the boxes out there fast enough. They're starving. That's frightening.
Yeah, no, really feeding a lot of people, and we're getting supplies donated. We're buying every day. I feel every day it seems like there are trucks coming in from Macro, from like the Costco of Poland, that we're buying tons of food. Of course, making them buy healthy food. I don't like when I see like Nutella and stuff, because I think we need to really look out for these people. And yeah, we've had a lot of discussions about how to treat, we went this trip, the other day went to see a center that we're involved with, which is taking care of the Roma community. There are 80 members of the Roma community that had to live on their own because they were being abused and picked on by Poles and by Ukrainians, real outcasts in their own, in any country. So they're in a separate place. I mean, just a lot going on, sort of overwhelming, trying to put some structure to it and to understand what to do, what's too much to do. But I feel like while there's this tremendous need, we just want to do all we can. It was nice to see, there was a nice article that came out in the New York Times yesterday about our work, which was always nice to see, your work highlighted and the work of the team, the amazing work of the JCC staff and volunteers, and especially in the New York Times, which is the paper of record. So
yeah, there's always another interview and there's always a group. And it was nice that we had a group yesterday, and things are a little back to normal in terms of groups starting to come back. And it's funny when they ask us what you do, because for 8 years, at least with you, we were like, we were well-oiled, fine-tuned. We knew exactly what we do. And now it's like, wait a second.
Yeah, what do
we do something completely different.
Let's bring in our friend and our guest, Rabbi David-Seth Kirshner, who is the senior rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Gloucester, a wonderful community that we just got a chance to meet them. I've spoken to them a couple of times. They've been to visit us. He is an amazing guy, past president of the New York Board of Rabbis, immediate past president of the New Jersey Board of Rabbis. I think that considering all the time he is spending in Krakow, we might get him to serve as the president of the Krakow Board of Rabbis, Avi. I think you could.
I yield to Rabbi Kirshner.
Wonderful, as would I. David, DSK to his close friends. Thank you for finding the time. I know you've got a lot going on, and we're going to talk about some of it. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too, friend. It's good to see you a few days ago in person, and good to see you in person, Rabbi Avi. Always great to see you. I have regards from you from Jason Shamus, who says that you two wreaked havoc in the halls of SAR as children.
We caused some trouble, and it was nice reconnecting with him in the past years and seeing him on an official level. That he turned out to be a mensch, and I turned out to be somewhat of a mensch. So, well, look at that.
Yeah, tell that to all the troublemakers in school today. It's all there's hope.
Avi, always a troublemaker. So I want to talk to you about a few things, Rabbi Kirshner. First and foremost, the trip. You just led an amazing mission, which we were part of the first group that visited us, which is sort of the pilot, and just figuring out what to do with people that want to visit and how we can do good together, and maybe talk a little bit about that. Where was the genesis for this idea? When did you come up with this idea to do it? How did you recruit people? Talk about the amazing response of your community, 600 duffel bags. And maybe also we'll talk a little bit about what your experience was in Krakow and in Poland and Ukraine for the trip.
There have been a few times in my life, not a lot, but a few times in my life that I knew my feet were not in the right place. When there was a war in Israel and I was sitting in the luxury of Gloucester, my feet weren't in the right place. And a few days later, I got on a plane to Israel. There have been other moments when loved ones have been sick and you just feel helpless. I'd rather feel helpless by their bedside than I would by myself. And it doesn't happen to me every day. It doesn't happen to me all the time, but there are times where my feet might be underneath me, but they're not in the right place. When this war broke out and Russia invaded Ukraine and this humanitarian crisis began to blossom, my feet were not in the right place being in Gloucester. And I knew we needed to do something. Everyone and their cousin wrote me emails and put on social media, hey, our ancestry is from the Ukraine. This is, they're wiping out this town that my grandfather is from, But meanwhile, what are we doing? We're putting it on social media and we're not doing anything about it. So I reached out to you, Jonathan, and said, we want to be a source of support, but at the same time, we don't want to be a burden. You guys, Avi and Jonathan are doing insane amounts of work. As tired as I am, I can't imagine what your lives look like right now. And the last thing we wanted to do was pull at your resources and pull at the resources of the country of Poland. Like we're going to come there and take, hotel rooms, and we're going to take buses, and we're going to take food. And meanwhile, you've got a 10% growth in Krakow alone in the last month. and probably a 16% growth in the country of Poland of responsibilities and humanitarian needs. So that was a bit of a push and pull for us. We said, you know what, we're going to bring a small group that will be nimble, that won't need too much. We brought 11 of us in total, 10 rooms. And we said, let's collect some supplies. And I really thought that we'd each bring 2 duffels each. We opened it up to the synagogue, maybe 3 duffels, right? We'll each pay a 1 baggage fee. In 4 days in our synagogue, we collected close to 30,000 pounds of supplies, an unthinkable number. I had to do the unthinkable and go into social media and tell all of our congregants, community members, stop, because we had no place to continue to put these things.
Very biblical of you.
Yeah, exactly. But it was gorgeous. And it wasn't only limited to Temple Emmanuel or Jews. There was this guy who came and goes, my name is Jose. I saw you on television. I needed to come here. I came, I brought diapers from Newark, which is about an hour drive, and I just wanted to help pack them for a few hours. It's just unbelievable. This is the kind of thing that happened. The entire community galvanized around this. And as one of our senior citizens said to me, she goes, Rabbi, I can always write a check. But when I dropped off baby formula and knowing you were going to bring it, I felt like I was actually doing something much more productive. And then the amazing thing was, we brought these materials, brought 130 of these bags. And we knew that within hours, it was on the shelves of the JCC in Krakow for people who needed it. That a day later, those medical supplies were in Ukraine. That, 24 hours later, there's sleeping bags for soldiers fighting in the war and for people who are part of the refugee crisis. So this stuff got to use immediately, and I let them know. And, that's a huge partnership. So it's a very, very long-winded answer of how this happened. If I were to open up the floodgates again for our temple, which I'm not doing just yet, I'd have 100 people who'd want to come, and I'd have another 50 to 70,000 pounds of supplies that would come tomorrow.
Wow.
Amazing. Yeah, no, it was the response was amazing, and we're still, we're a couple of weeks later, and we're still all figuring out. And I'll talk to you after the show about trying to get the rest of the bags. Another group came and brought some of the bags, and we're still working on getting the rest of the bags here. And they've done a lot of good. We were able to distribute them, as you said, right away.
Yeah, and the other thing we did that was really helpful is it was very focused supplies. So we didn't have people bring used clothing, and we didn't have odds and ends. We limited it to 6 or 7 things, right? Toiletry items that people would need, socks and underwear. People don't need coats right now the same way because we're entering spring and then summer. So that, we didn't do a collection of that, but we needed underwear, undershirts, over-the-counter medicines, Tylenol, pain reliever. Then we needed some insulin and baby formulas, diapers, wipes, those kinds of things. So we kept it quite focused. The other thing we did that was really beautiful is every bag we brought, we left there. Now, these are people coming over with knapsacks or with little tiny, carry-ons, and they're collecting things. They're collecting a toy for their child. They're collecting a stroller. They're collecting a little a car seat or this or that. These bags are theirs that will help them schlep wherever they go on their exodus. Many of them had wheels. So we were really happy to leave 130 bags there, plus what Rabbi Birkin left, so close to 200 bags, and we have 500 more bags to come, and the bags will stay. The bags staying are important for people to have. Many of them have wheels so that they can go from place to place as needed.
That is very, very important. The people are talking about, the Ukrainians themselves. You ask them what you need, and a lot of them are saying, yeah, we need the bags. We need to be able to move around. And having been at the border and seeing people holding, schlepping, and not having an extra hand, that itself is a Dayenu moment. So, kol hakavod.
Rabbi, I'm sorry to wax rabbinic. It's actually not my style so much, but we're going to say in the Seder, everyone has to see themselves as if they personally came out of Egypt. I always ask that question to my Seder, what 3 things would you bring? The fun theoretical question, what 3 things would you bring? It's no longer a theoretical question. For all of these people, it's not, for 4 million people, it's not a theoretical question. And for those who say they bring their family, my answer to that is, Why? Because some family can't come. Your senior citizens can't come. The young age fighting men can't come. And they're part of a family. So you don't always get that luxury. So if ever those words of the Seder were around, it's so prescient this year in so many ways.
We're going to talk a little bit about that as we move toward Pesach and generally the Jewish world's response, and we sort of move out to the macro. But I want to talk about your impressions of your trip. You've been to Krakow Poland 18 times or
17
times.
Wow.
Okay. And so you're one of us at this point. So you've been here. This is a very, very different trip. Talk about your impressions of the trip. And I don't mean to say, and I'm not, JCC is doing great work I really don't mean that. I mean your actual, your real impressions about it.
So first of all, I came 16 times just to eat at Zapietzik. It's my favorite restaurant in all of Eastern Europe, the best pierogies and latkes in the world. And then we do other work while we're there. I've been to Poland 17 times. The only time I went to Poland without going to a concentration camp. Didn't go to Auschwitz, didn't go to Birkenau, Majdanek, Sobibor, Treblinka, didn't take a, Mila 18 Schlagplatz, none of that. It was a totally different trip, which I think is emblematic of the transition that I am witnessing of the country and people of Poland. Michael Shudrick had this great line. He said the entire Jewish community got on the phone immediately when this happened, and they created a crisis management team. And he realized when he hung up the phone, it's the first time that the Jews are part of the management and not the crisis. It's a great line, right? So I was witnessing the hospitality, the goodness, the humanity and humaneness of the Polish people in mass. Yes, the JCC in Krakow, the Nozick Synagogue and the JDC and the Jaffe, all these organizations that are part of what they do, the Warsaw, Hillel and JCC, they all are social service based. So they're doing a lot of the yeoman's work, a lot of receiving the people who are part of this humanitarian crisis. And they're the ones who are on the front lines that are saying, when you get to the train station or when you get to a shelter or we're going to get housing, we're got to help people. And this is what we're doing. And we have the resources to do it, not financial, but the human power and the outlets. So that has been really, really beautiful and heartwarming. We've seen the very worst that a person can do, and we've seen the very best that people can do together. And that's important. It's really been buoying for me. We've heard some terrible stories, but we've also given a sense of hope. So the first person we met when we came was a woman who came over right away. She didn't eat for 60 hours, 60. Any morsels of food she got, she gave to her 2 little children. And she stood in a line for 47 hours to cross the border. So for me, what's gorgeous about that moment, because it's a horrible, harrowing moment created by a madman, is that the reason and the way that we give her hope is by demonstrating the restoration of hope and humanity. When you can demonstrate goodness in people to her, it reminds her that people are good and the world is good, not all bad. So we saw a lot of that in Poland. And when you go to the border crossing in Medyka, granted, it wasn't a high traffic day the day we went. There have been other high traffic days and high traffic moments, but you have to walk down like almost a quarter of a mile of a corridor, and the entire corridor is lined with support services, from the World Central Kitchen to a triage center from Turkey and Egypt to people, from Jewish organizations and Hindu organizations and Sikh organizations giving food, supplies, help, anything necessary. So to see this, unofficial United Nations coming together and being supportive was buoying in the midst of something quite traumatic and painful. And I love that. So that was really powerful. I used to I paid my way through rabbinical school working in a funeral home. And I was really good at creating a really strong barrier between the painful stuff that I would see every day and how it affected my heart. Because if I let it in too much, you're done. And sometimes I do that as a rabbi. And I kind of did that in this role where I didn't spend a whole lot of time, digesting and processing the human side of what I saw, because it just takes too much of a human toll on me. However, what I did see was people going through their worst moments unequivocally, but at the very same time, I saw the very best in humanity. And the humanity part of that is international, right? Yes, we were a humanitarian mission from New Jersey, but there were humanitarians from Britain, humanitarians from Israel, humanitarians from Thailand, humanitarians from Italy. Humanity is a shared DNA. And we saw the best in humanity, and that was very buoying. And we can't take our eye off that ball.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm somebody, I never let anything in, and that generally works for me. but it's been absolutely inspiring. And I know I say it every time I'm doing this, that one of the real takeaways for me from this whole experience has been how giving people can be, to see people and to opening their hearts, opening their homes. It's been amazing. You right now, and I think still, if not as of yesterday, had 9 people living in your house in New Jersey. Right? Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, not to make it all about the personal and stuff, but that's would that have happened had you not come to Poland? Would you just do that because you're a good guy, obviously, and a good person, and a rabbi, and a spiritual leader, and a moral leader? Or were you so inspired and said, wait a minute, I have to go to another level, which is bringing a family of 9 into your house to live with you?
When we come to Poland, all those times that I come, we usually have the same guide who is a translator and helps facilitate and fix things. His name is Marek. You met him. And he's developed into a friend. He's a really wonderful.
We love Marek. We all love Marek.
He's really developed into a wonderful human soul. And when we asked Mark to be with us, he said, I can do it on one condition. I have to take a bunch of phone calls. So if I'm okay walking away from the group every once in a while, of course, what do we care, right? I found out, not through him, because of his humility, what he was doing on his phone calls was he was calling all of his friends, neighbors, classmates he hasn't talked to in weeks, and trying to organize space in their homes for different refugee families. He was trying to coordinate that. He has 2 little children at home, and he's taken in a whole group of people. And I thought to myself, God, if he's doing that, why can't we do something? So there are 2 things that motivated me. One is, everyone says, if I were alive during the war, I would have done this and I would have done that. And then all of a sudden you find someone who comes to town, you're like, oh, we're traveling. We're very busy. Oh, we're going to do some construction in the house. You got the allergies, the COVID. And I think to myself, during the Shoah, there were people who jeopardized their lives and the lives of the people they were hiding to keep them in a shelter, a tiny place. The only thing we're jeopardizing now is our lifestyle. It's a little cramp in our lifestyle. As we say in Yiddish, BFD, right? Like, it's no big deal. So this family, through a very circuitous route, they went from, this part is amazing. They went from their home in Kiev to Odessa, where his mother lives. Then from Odessa to Moldova. Moldova, they were stopped at the border, and their son and son-in-law had to stay and fight. 9 of them came over, the family of 9, which includes a grown 24-year-old daughter who's 9 months pregnant. Thank you. And her infant, who's 1.5 years old. They went from Moldova to Poland. Poland, they drove to Brussels. They had to sleep in their car for 3 nights. In Brussels, they went to try and get an American visa. They connected with someone who was connected to our family, which is how they ended up with us. They then raised funds for them, got them to Frankfurt. Frankfurt, they flew to Cancun. Cancun, they hitched a ride to Tijuana. They were stopped at the border for 2 days in Tijuana, crossed over to San Diego. They cobbled together some money to fly them from San Diego to New York. They went and stayed in Chinatown for 2 days in New York, and then they've been with the Kirshners since. And our community, again, has absolutely galvanized itself. So in the course of 4 days, all the children have been seen by pediatricians. The pregnant daughter, 9 months pregnant, has been accepted by the hospital for whatever her needs will be for birthing, and she's been seen by a high-risk OBGYN getting prenatal medicine. The baby had an ear infection. He got amoxicillin and is taken care of, but everyone got good, clean bills of health. All of the kids have got manicures, pedicures, and they're getting their hair blown out tomorrow so that they can feel sweet and like kids again. They all are going to start school on Monday that they're doing from the Ukraine via Zoom. So we got them all Chromebooks. The synagogue all cobbled together, got them all Chromebooks for each kid so they can, before they were doing it 1 kid at a time on their little computer, would take an hour of class. Now they all have a Chromebook. They can all go to school together. We have people cobbled together so they can have what we call in Hebrew Yom Kaif, and they're going to go to Great Wolf Lodge for 2 days to go enjoy life so the kids can try and shed off some of this trauma. And we're already hip deep in finding them a place to live for 6 months. They don't have to jostle around anymore. So they have instantly become adopted by our community, and the Kirshner family has fallen deeply in love with these people. They are amazing people, humble and sweet. And it's our responsibility. It's our duty. And so what? Is it a little inconvenient? Yeah, a little inconvenient. BFD. For them, it's a whole lot more inconvenient. And we, you cannot pass by those trees in Yad Vashem and not think about the sacrifice people made, putting their life on the line to save Jews. I'm not putting my life on the line. It's not even like a huge financial difference. I'm buying more fruit and vegetables and more bread at the store. Big deal. Big deal. It's not a huge lift. And we need to, do this extra bit, not because we need capes or not because we need recognition, because it's the human thing to do. Sorry for my sermon.
Hey, what?
Pretty good sermon.
Amen. No, it's beautiful. And you think a lot about the response, about the Jewish response. How much, and this is for both rabbis, how much of our response do you think as a people? I feel that in our local sense here in Krakow, it's constantly on my mind. Silence 80 years ago and how we respond today. There's not 30 seconds that doesn't go by that I don't think about that. It is weighing very heavily on my shoulders. How much of the Jewish response to tragedy do we think is colored by the world's silence, or mostly silence 80 years ago? And I've heard ways, and I should say that let me preface that. Excuse me. I hear, oh, nobody cared about us. Why should we care about others? And to me, it's nobody cared about us. Therefore, we had to learn the lesson and know what that's like for no one to care about us. Therefore, we must have an even stronger responsibility to care for others.
Yeah, I spoke about this a few weeks ago. That what you're saying comes straight out of the Torah, and we had this discussion and a little bit of debate. I think that's what it means to be a good Jew, and I think that's what the Pesach story is supposed to teach those who left Egypt. Now you have to know how to treat people. It says it time and time again. So if you had this trauma, and it's a trauma that's part of our history and our collective consciousness. So now we have to learn how to apply, those messages so that we don't treat anyone like that, and we treat people who are in that trauma and are victims in a way that we would have wanted. There's no question about that. I firmly believe that that's what we're supposed to be doing.
5 times 32 times in the 5 books of the Torah, it says, "You were strangers in Egypt, therefore you should not be treating the stranger with any form of oppression. You need to be kind to the widow." That's number 1. Okay, so ditto what Rabbi Avi said. Number 2, the most profound theological teaching is from Maimonides, for me. Maimonides says a man who walks by a beggar on the street and ignores him is an idol worshiper. Maimonides said that, not Kirshner, not Abraham Joshua Heschel, not some group from Trua or If Not Now or APAC, like none of those left liberal progressive. Maimonides said it. And what Maimonides was saying is, if you are going to walk by someone in need and ignore their need when you can make a difference, ignore them, then what you do is tantamount to idol worship, meaning all the tefillin you put on, all the talis that you have, all the prayers you say are meaningless if you can't execute on it. So how do we claim to be good Jews if we can't do that?
I feel like, not to go very far down this path, but when there are so many different actions that you need to take in Judaism, and the more observant brand of Judaism that you're into, the more things there are for you to do. I think sometimes you're able to feel like a good Jew without necessarily being a good person. And I wish that all areas of Judaism did a better job of enforcing this idea that there's no being a good Jew without being a good person. And you can daven and bend your knees the most and do this and not touch this. And your matzah can have taken 1 second to create the matzah. It can be the shmura of the shmura of the shmura. But if you're not a decent human being, then all of those are the next level after the basics. And I wish that we as a people, and I don't mean to, the more Orthodox you are, the more you're guilty. I don't. But I wish we as a people were a little more focused on the being a good person aspect and not caught up in all the details of what it means to be a good Jew.
I think you're right. My dogs echoed that. We have a speaker at our synagogue tomorrow who just wrote a book about Abraham Joshua Heschel. What I think was the secret sauce of Heschel was not that he was such a progressive or a social righteous activist. He was good in both camps. Heschel prayed 3 times a day. He kept kosher. He observed the Shabbat. He was an observant Jew between him and God. But he also was the man who coined the phrase, "I'm praying with my feet." He's the one who marched with King. He's the one who said that during slavery and the way that we're treating blacks in the South in America, you can't eat lettuce that was picked by illegal aliens and people who weren't paid a living wage on Pesach. It's not kosher for Pesach, right? He could live in both camps. And what he tried to get us to strive to do is to live in both camps. Not one, not the other, but both. We can have a religious life between us and God and a religious life between us and other humans. Between us and other humans that are really important.
So one of the decisions that we made very early, and this is something Rabbi Avi and I have talked about a lot, and we're in agreement, but that I've seen, I won't say that there's full agreement in the Jewish world, is responsibility to help the other, to help others, right? What is our responsibility to help fellow Jews versus our responsibility to help everyone? And from my point of view, the Jewish world is such a strong integrated network, and we really do. And again, there's problems that we don't do a good job with Holocaust survivors that are still in need, and there's a lot of things that we don't do a great job. But overall, if you look at the way Jews are able to take care of each other, as opposed to the way almost any other group, Poles or the French or anyone else, we're very good at that. And I feel with this crisis that overall, the Jews are going to be okay, and I'm not so sure about the non-Jews. And for us, this has been something that's been very much, as a Jewish institution, that's been very much at the forefront of our minds. This idea of treating everyone equally and being especially mindful of the fact that non-Jews don't have the support network that we do, and maybe we as Jews need to provide that support.
The family we're hosting is not Jewish. Before we began hosting them, we reached out to people who might have homes and other things. At least 20 people asked us the question, are they Jewish? I didn't have the heart to even respond. Why? Because their needs don't change one iota, whether they're Jewish or not. Right. Things we talk about aren't built around whether we're Jewish or not. It just doesn't matter. They are human. Their love for their children is exactly the same as my love for my children. Their tears taste the same as our tears, right? Salt water. Think about that for Passover. So whether they believe in Christ or they believe in our God, what does it matter? Their trauma is a trauma. And, we are fearful as a whole. I'm being critical of Jews now. We're fearful that when we become globalists, that we no longer are focused on the needs of a Jew, period. And I think that's craziness. That's like saying, to my kids that if I show love for another kid, that I can't love my kid anymore. That's ludicrous, right? My love for my child is unparalleled, but it doesn't mean I don't have the capability to love other children. And we have many chambers in our heart, many rooms that can be filled. So being a globalist and loving and helping other people should not take away from our needs and commitment and allegiance and alliance to the Jewish people. It's not going to happen. Just because we're supporting people who aren't Jewish and part of this crisis doesn't mean that we now celebrate Hamas and forget about the state of Israel. That's the slippery slope people are afraid of, and it's Narishkeit.
I think that these are one of the unintended consequences of anti-Semitism. In other words, anti-Semitism, people don't like us, people do us harm. Sometimes anti-Semitism is, in the case of the Holocaust, is doing a tremendous amount of harm to murder millions of people. But, there are other insidious, more subtle results of anti-Semitism. And one is this idea that the whole world's against us. Nobody ever stands with us. So we need to just stick to ourselves. And for certain elements of keeping a group together, that's helpful. But in today's world, if you're not living in it, if you're in the Haredi world, that outlook might make sense for you because you're generally trying to stay separate, right? That's almost the goal. The way that you do most things that you do is built on this idea of keeping yourself separate. But for the rest of us, from modern Orthodox, and the rest of us, it's that's not the case. And this idea of the sort of chip on our shoulder that we have, even if we were right to have it there, even if the world has screwed us over for thousands of years, but this idea that we're first just so concerned with Jews is problematic. It really.
Well, I'll defend a little bit. I wouldn't call it a chip on our shoulder. And I would say that we have this beautiful Pavlovian response of, are they Jewish? We need to take care of ourselves. And like you said, anti-Semitism, persecution, wandering all over the place. This is built in for thousands of years that we need to take care of ourselves. And that's a beautiful thing that we've done. And we also have to be ready to understand that we need to take care of those people who are in trauma or in pain and who are not part of our camp as well. So I wouldn't say it like, oh my gosh, look at them. They're just worried about themselves. It's actually quite beautiful that we have this network and we really, really do care. And it's what kept us around for all these years. What we need to do is somehow find a way to, allow for this idea of a more global responsibility. And that's a complicated thing and it's moving, right? So it's in the more liberal world and then it moves to the mono-Orthodox world. And one would hope that it would reach, the more isolated and insulated part of our community as well.
The problem is, Rabbi Avi, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So if the problem is historically looking at this from 30,000 feet, the Jews have been the other, the Jews are insulated, the Jews are the shtetl, they're inside the shtetl, right? And all we do is dream about being included in all the other things that are happening outside of the shtetl. And then we continue to return to the shtetl, and then we're put in the category of other, meaning, all we could hope for 50, 70, 90, 120 years ago was to have country clubs where we would be accepted, to go to any school that we would want to have a position in any world, own property anywhere we wanted. We couldn't dream of that stuff. If we were to do a seance and bring our ancestors back from 50 and 150 years ago and tell them the problems we'd have today, they'd say, you woke us up for this? This is what you woke us up for? This is what we dreamt of, right? And now we're coming back to the same place that brings us, oh, you know what? It's a much more comfortable posture to be in the place of shtetl and victimhood. We know that one really well. And I think that, you can't ask for this moment of arrival and not be prepared to arrive. You got to change that posture.
I hear you. I spoke about that there are really two Jewish worlds, and there's the Jewish world called Israel, and then there's the Jewish world outside. And in the Jewish world called Israel, that's what gives me such pride and joy to see that, at least on an official level, they're saying, okay, we took care of ourselves. Obviously, we've got our terrorists. We've got to deal with ourselves. But when there's a trauma, when there's a crisis, we're sending out people. And if you walk from Medika and you see a big Jewish flag, that's totally unrepresented, disproportionate to the world that's trying to help out. Beautiful, wonderful, I get it. Outside of Israel, it's more complicated. We're still a bit, nervous about anti-Semitism. We're still marginalized. We're still trying to balance that. How much do I go out, and how much am I going to worry about assimilation? How much do I? It's a much more complicated equation. Agreed?
I agree, but my hypothesis is the antidote to anti-Semitism is to be or lagoyim, to be a light unto the nations, right? And it fits perfectly in the theme of sunlight is the best disinfectant. And it gives me unbridled pride to know that the first and last and all the way through steps you see when you cross through Medika is an Israeli flag and Jewish stars. Unbridled pride. But it gives me even more pride to know that those stars are next to a bunch of different symbols of different religions, faiths, countries, and backgrounds to show that we're working homogeneously in a uniform effort to help humanity, not a siloed effort to say, are you Jewish? Come with me. Right? Because that's the problem. One of the issues I used to have with Chabad would stop you anywhere in the world. Are you Jewish? You want to put on tefillin? Lovely. It's important to put on tefillin. I just put on tefillin a few hours ago. Did they stop anyone and say, are you Jewish? Did you visit someone who was sick today? Are you Jewish? Did you give tzedakah today? Are you Jewish? Did you help the elderly? Did you feed someone who didn't have food? That's just as important. Could you imagine if we started a campaign that put tables in all of these central places and said, are you Jewish? Would you like to feed the hungry? Come with me. I'm going to walk you to a soup kitchen. Isn't that important?
I like it. What do you mean, could you imagine?
Yeah, I'm all for it. Let's do it.
Started for Herzl, Jonathan.
What happens when we lose interest? Moving it a little away from the philosophical back to Ukraine. It's funny that Jews, we're so fascinated, and I appreciate all that we're saying, and I agree with a lot of what you're both saying, if not all of what you're both saying. But I find it endlessly fascinating how fascinated we are with ourselves.
Yes.
What do we do? What happens? How do we see this playing out with Ukraine? In other words, the world, nobody thought this was going to go on so long. Right? Nobody thought so. I remember when you called me, I was walking my dog and I was walking up and down the street, and we had a long call that first time when we spoke about this. And I was kind of thinking like, yeah, obviously once the war ends, this will continue going on. But this was, a few weeks ago, I was like, oh, this could all be over. A lot of what's happening could be already ended. And that's not the case. We see this is going on, continuing, and Ukrainian people are fighting valiantly. And surprising all of us, something that I don't know in my lifetime, and we're all pretty close here to the same age. David, you're a little younger than me and Avi. Okay, I'm older than Avi as well, but fair enough. In my lifetime, there hasn't been any military. I mean, since I was a tiny kid in Entebbe, which was just one action, it wasn't a whole thing. But I think since the 6-Day War, you not counting every time Afghanistan has defeated an empire, because Afghanistan seems to be 3-0 versus major world empires. Afghanistan's its own story, but you don't have stories like this. We don't get things wrong so much. Russia in a few days is going to walk all over. But anyway, this is going on for a long period of time. Soon, you got to think that soon the world will lose interest. A lot of this is because it's women and children. It makes it so much easier. Even if we think, oh, those Ukrainians did this years ago, they did that, but it wasn't the women and children really. So it's so easy for us to look at photos of women and children and continue to open our hearts. How do we sustain this? How does your community, that's been incredibly generous and financially and in terms of packing and support and time in every way, really a model for other communities, how do we keep this going? It's our responsibility to do that. If we want to keep helping these people, then we need to keep the interest of the people who are making this possible. How do we do that?
And the harder part is, as a world, we have the attention span of a tick. We don't keep it. So interestingly, I thought this war would go on for 2-3 years, and I think it's nothing short of miraculous that it's we're seeing levels of retreat that we never imagined. The X factor that no strategic analyst could ever laser in on is what it is to fight for your life. Golda Meir said to Joe Biden a few times, we have a secret weapon. What is it? We have nowhere else to go, right? That's what worked for the Israel people. I think that's the case for Ukraine. Like, they don't want to go back to a Russian oppression where they were, and they have nowhere else to go. They're going to fight, with a sense of a fierce humanity. I think it's great. So that's important. I do think that is a reminder to all of us who are leaders in the communal world to strike when the coals are hot. You don't get the benefit of waiting. Whenever I want to write an article about a particular topic, and I'm like, I'll do it in a couple of days, it's over. Forget it. Who in the world is talking about Whoopi Goldberg's comments on The View? I mean, I'm jogging your memory now to bring that up. Who is talking about the banishing of the book Mouse, right? We have the attention span of a tick. And the next thing is going to happen. And when it does, this will be yesterday's news. And that is really, really sad.
Listen,
I don't know.
There are two issues that need to be dealt with regard to this Ukrainian crisis. One is helping people, which we're all doing, and it's wonderful. And then there's something called rebuilding Ukraine, which is like tens and billions, and that already we can't even wrap our heads around that. So we're the world kind of wrapped and got excited about trying to help individuals, and we are going to lose interest at some point. It's going to be a problem.
But here's the thing, Rabbi Avi, if a tornado is coming, you're scared for your life and you hide under your desk and your bed in the basement and you pray for shelter and for life. And then if you are so blessed to have shelter in life and you come out after the storm, you take a deep breath, you look up and you thank God, you bench Gomel and you say, okay, you start the process of cleaning up. Humans know how to clean up. And when it comes to giving support and aid, we got that. We have a hard time with tornadoes. And that's exactly what's happening to the Ukrainian people. And there's a tornado coming. It's retreating. And we hope that the storm is passing, that it's not retreating for a moment. We hope it's retreating in permanence. And we gotta, they'll be able to rebuild because they're strong, and we'll give them the resources to rebuild. And there'll be all types of opportunities for trade and communication and jobs. Jobs are a really good thing, but we got to get past that tornado first.
I think what's interesting for us here, besides this period that we're in and seeing what we're doing as this sort of humanitarian organization, we had AmeriCares in here yesterday and dealing with all these different organizations that are advising us and supporting us. It's been pretty remarkable from my point of view to be part of this. But also the effect, what will it have on the Jewish community? We had 20% of our young people in the JCC community here were Ukrainian before the war. And this will transform a community in a way that we aren't surprised by what the result might be 20 years from now, but we're surprised at the speed that this is going to happen. In other words, I talked about it a little before, but Germany, you go to Germany, you have a few 100,000 Jews, 95% of which are not German Jews, right? They're from somewhere else. But a generation or two from now, what's the difference? Because we're all just moving around from somewhere else. And this is our strength as a people. At this point, with the situation deteriorating in Ukraine before the war, we always felt, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, we could have a majority of Polish Jews could be Ukrainian. And now we're seeing it happen because of a reason we didn't anticipate. But this idea of Polish Jewry being reborn because Ukrainians have left war is something also that we're seeing, and that we have to get our heads around as a community. And people like Rabbi Shudrick in Warsaw and us here in Krakow need to start to prepare our communities, or continue to prepare in a more meaningful way to absorb these people and to get them up to speed and to welcome them and have them become Ukrainian Jews, part of the Polish Jewish community, because I think a lot of them are going to stay.
So, my friend Amy Zagan, who was with us when we came to Poland last week, and she's good friends with Vicki Warner, who's the president of the Friends of JCC Krakow. She taught me something really interesting. She said that trauma can be internalized into DNA, which is why we see certain behaviors from people who are children and grandchildren of survivors, but more particularly in children. And it got me thinking, that if trauma can be absorbed into DNA, so can other life moments. So can betrayal, so can hurt, so can fear, and so can opportunity and blessing. And what I think is important, and this has to do with the arrival piece we were talking about, Rabbi Avi, is to figure out a posture, even though it's a little uncomfortable at times, and figure out a steady stance of balance where we can absorb a change in our DNA individually and collectively. That's what you're talking about, Jonathan. You're talking about, look, on autopilot, I knew exactly what our DNA was going to look like for the next 10 years. And then this happened, and it's going to change the DNA of our community and what we're about. Well, guess what else did that? The pandemic, right? Pandemic's going to change it in ways that we're still dealing with. We don't know how it's going to fall. Someone asked me once about how are you dealing with the pandemic? I go, it's about the guy who jumps off the 100th floor of the building, and then the 80th floor, he goes, it's not so bad yet, right? Like, you don't know how this is going to land. And we're still processing that. But I think the moment we can say our DNA is going to change, we don't know how, but we're absorbing that change, is mission critical to allowing that change to happen.
Whoa. Heavy words.
There's a lot that we've discussed, and a lot to discuss in the future as we continue to process this from the New Jersey area, from Krakow, from Israel. This is, as you say, this is not going away. And the Jewish response, not only, the important thing here is the Jewish response is not only about helping these people. The Jewish response also forms who we are, and people are watching us, and young people and teenagers and kids are seeing what we do, and they're learning from that. And it's so important on many different levels for us to get this right, and to do this the right way, and for the best qualities of Judaism, for the history that's caused us to sometimes be a little inward looking, for that not to win out over the values that are such an important part of Judaism, which lead us to welcome the stranger. And I hope that all of us can continue to do that. And thank you for being a friend. Thank you for being a leader. Thank you for being such an important part of our community here in Krakow. And thank you for being such an important resource for your community and for your community being so integrated and connected to our little community here in Krakow.
It's us that needs to thank you. You're doing the holy work. You're on the ground. That's number one. I want to leave you with some good news. When we came back, we understood that you're going to be hosting Seders in Krakow and in Warsaw for not only the Polish Jewish community, but for Ukrainian people who came over. Some who identify as Jewish, some not. But the idea of the Seder is the same. I've always had non-Jews at my Seder growing up my whole life. And that's an absorption of a real expense. Reached out to our community and we told them that this is happening. And we asked everyone to donate per soul and not to do more than 4 souls, so that I know some people could write a big check and it would be done, whatever. So many kids in our community have written checks from their bank accounts, their piggy banks, they're selling things, they're babysitting money. And collectively in Bergen County, our synagogue, Rabbi Pupko's synagogue, and a few other synagogues have raised close to $75,000 for Sedarium and Passover food for the community of Krakow and the community of Warsaw for the work you're doing. Anything that's not being used for that, you're going to put to good use afterwards. So later this week or early next week, that money is being transferred to you both, to you and the community of Warsaw. And I wanted to leave you with that news to let you know that we're here with you this entire time. We're here by your side. Ukrainian people need to know they're not alone. You need to know you're not alone too. And we love you all.
Amazing.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
You have something, you're part of something very special, and you've built something very special. And thank you for your friendship and for your generosity and for your support. Thank you. Listen, have a wonderful Pesach, and I look forward to seeing you guys here. And I look forward to breaking Pesach with Zapi Yetzik. I have a feeling we might see you soon in a 3-dimensional sense. Please God. Be well, my friend.
Okay.
You too.
Bye.
Bye. You too. Thanks, David.